Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and today we are going to talk about purpose and how the lack of purpose can lead to regret. And here to help us do that is Jordan Grumet, whose information I have right here. He has completed his degrees at the University of Michigan and Northwestern University, and he is the author of The Purpose Code. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Michael, so happy to be here today.
So there's so many things that I want to ask. I think the first thing is, when you say purpose, what do you mean by it?
So I think I actually define purpose very differently than most people. So let me tell you, colloquially, people think of purpose as your why. I don't think of it like that at all. In fact, I think of purpose as the actions you take in the present and future to light you up. And so, why do I make this distinction? Because when you start thinking about purpose as your why, it really becomes anxiety prone. You start thinking, well, there's this one big thing, and I've either got to get it right and the world is great, or if I miss it, then everything is miserable. And it actually sets us up not to feel good about purpose. And for that reason, a lot of people put off even thinking about purpose because it's so fraught with anxiety.
So you do differentiate between the type of purpose where it's one grand purpose, and you talk about little p purpose. First, I want to just clarify, are you recommending that people do not have a big purpose in their lives?
So what I talk about is big P purpose and little p purpose. Big P purpose is goal oriented, and it's usually big and audacious. In America, we always say, if you think it, then you can do it. So it tends to be like becoming a billionaire, running a 7-figure business, or becoming president, or traveling to the moon. These are really big, difficult things to achieve. And often they're very difficult to achieve. A lot of times we don't have agency. We're not the right person at the right time, saying the right things with a lot of luck. And so this is a very anxiety prone version of purpose versus little p purpose, which is not goal oriented. It's actually process oriented, meaning doing things that light us up, as opposed to being scarce like big P purpose. It's actually very abundant. There are a million things we could do that we could really enjoy. So is big P purpose always bad? Yes. Big P purpose basically sets you up for anxiety and doesn't make you feel good. Now, a lot of people say, but I want to have goals. And I often tell people, well, you can have little p purpose with goals. In fact, you can even have little p purpose with big, audacious goals. There's a difference. And here's the difference. For instance, I love podcasting. I'm a podcaster. I love interviewing people. My little p purpose is interviewing people. And when I interview someone, that hour I spend interviewing them is exciting and lights me up. And even if I accidentally erase the recording and no one gets to hear it, it was still a good use of my hour. So that's little p purpose. I enjoy the process of doing it. Now, I could decide for my podcast that I wanted to get 1 million downloads a month. That starts sounding like a big, audacious goal. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. When it becomes big P purpose is when I start doing things that I don't enjoy the process of doing in order to get there. So if I'm like, I want to start having 1 million downloads a month, I only have 1,000 downloads a month. So I'm going to have to start making TikTok videos and start being on YouTube and start spending a lot of time on X and Facebook. Well, guess what? I don't like doing those things. So it starts to become big P purpose when I'm spending a lot of time doing things I don't like to do in service of a goal that I may or may not reach. And so all big P purpose is bad. Big audacious goals aren't particularly bad, but if it becomes the why of what we're doing as opposed to enjoying the process, then it becomes sour.
Okay, this is actually very relevant to me. So you just kind of took the conversation in a direction that I didn't plan on, but it's okay because I think it's good. So my big P purpose is to be a successful talk show host, whether it be on radio, podcast, whatever. And so I was in prison for a long time. When I got out, a talk show host, a successful talk show host friend of mine, who actually got me interested in this, business or career, for lack of a better word. And he told me basically what you just said. If you're going to do this, you have to be on X, you have to be on Facebook, which I had no interest in doing. And so I did it. I got on X, I got on Facebook, and I often find the experience to be very toxic.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I've met a lot of good friends on these formats. I've had a lot of good experiences. So I try to live my life. And what I'm noticing as I pursue my goal is that I do have the big P purpose, but I also have the sort of process stuff, doing these interviews, like what I'm learning right now from talking to you or talking to other
So let me
guests.
ask you a question then. Would it still be worthwhile to do all these things if you never met the big goal? Like, would it still be a good use of your time? Would you still enjoy it? Would it have still
Yes.
been worthwhile? So then
Yes.
it isn't big P purpose. Then it's
Okay.
little P purpose.
So that's
It
what
only becomes big P purpose when it becomes so goal focused that you start spending all your time doing things you don't enjoy or that don't light you up in order to reach that purpose.
okay. So
So
the
I wouldn't call
process.
that big P purpose. I'd
Okay.
say
So
you're involved in little P purpose. You happen to have some goals, as I was explaining before, but your enjoyment of and your version of whether you're feeling a life of purpose or not doesn't depend on reaching that goal. Whether you reach the goal or not doesn't matter. You're still doing things that light you up, that excite you, that feel meaningful.
see, I like that what you're saying, and it also demands flexibility. A previous goal of mine was to ultimately be a therapist. That's what I wanted to do. I spent a lot of time studying psychology, learning about psychology. I devoted a lot of my time to my own personal growth. And then through a long chain of events, I ended up a guest on a talk show host. This is while I was incarcerated. And once I did that, I realized that's what I wanted to do. So I was able to adapt, change my goal, and pursue that. And people tell me, and I think it's largely correct, that I'm already successful, right? That I've made a lot of friends. I do a daily talk show right after this one. I'll be doing it actually with a Hollywood star. I would never have dreamed of that while I was incarcerated. I've been able to become friends and acquaintances of people whose books I used to read, and like they were celebrities to me. And now I talk to them like, as easy as I'm talking to you right now. So in many ways, that is the success. But I still do have my long-term goal. So I guess you can, but you wouldn't. You're saying, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a large P purpose means that you're devoting your time to the attainment of something that ultimately you may not achieve, and you're making yourself miserable by doing it. Would that be a fair way to put it?
Or specifically you feeling like you're reaching your version of purpose depends on reaching that goal or not.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense to me.
So the goal only becomes toxic when it starts defining your purpose. So I would argue you wanted to become a talk show host and you had this kind of big goal of, I don't know what that was. Maybe it was having a network show, or maybe it was having a certain amount of listeners. But I'd argue that if becoming a talk show host is your little P purpose, you kind of did that when you started doing talk shows, regardless if you're successful, regardless if anyone listened, regardless if you had a name for yourself or not. When you started doing the thing and that thing lit you up, you were deeply engaged in little P purpose. And if it truly is little P purpose, whether you reach some pre-designed goal or not, doesn't matter. If you happen to reach the goal, it's a happy side effect of doing something that lights you up. If you don't reach the goal, you still enjoy the process of doing what you're doing. So it pretty much qualifies as a little P purpose.
Now you talk about purpose anchors, and I've never heard this term before. What are purpose anchors?
Well, so this is what people often tell me. They're like, well, that's great. You say you should be living a life of purpose, little P purpose or big P purpose. But either way, they say, well, I don't know how to find my purpose. And I always tell people, well, you don't find your purpose, you build or create it. It's a very active process. But it is true, you need some inkling, some beckoning, some whispering, something that kind of lights you up so that you can build a life of purpose around it. I call those purpose anchors. So we're not really trying to find our purpose. What we're trying to do is identify our purpose anchor so that we can then do this active thing of building a life of purpose around it. And so people still come to me and say, hey, well, how do you find your purpose anchors? And I talk about this a lot in my book, The Purpose Code. There are 3 or 4 really easy ways to start thinking about purpose anchors. And you can do some easy mental exercises and it starts telling you, okay, these are some things that light me up. Now I've got to do the hard work of building a life of purpose around them.
Okay, so I want to actually ask you that. So how do we do that? Like I know people who ask me that question. I want to have a purpose, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to do. Like for me, it just sort of happened. I got involved in as a guest on a talk show, and next thing I knew, I just realized this is like, I don't want to say born to do, but if anything I was born to do, it was this, right? So how do people do that? How do they build their lives around a purpose?
So because you just gave your own example, I'm going to start with the last way, right? Normally will tell you 3 or 4 ways to start developing your purpose anchors, but I'm going to start with what I usually save for the last one because it's illustrative for what you did. So the last one is called the spaghetti method. What that means is I have no idea what purpose looks in my life. So I'm just going to sign up for things I normally don't sign up for. I'm going to say yes to people I normally don't say yes to. I'm going to do something that maybe feels a little uncomfortable and see how that feels. If you throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and you see what sticks, in your case, you signed up for, you did something you normally wouldn't have done, right? You decided to be a guest on a talk show, probably made you feel a little uncomfortable. But after doing that, you were like, oh, there's something here. So that's the spaghetti method, which just means being open to the world and trying new things. So let's talk about some other ways to discover your purpose anchors. I'm a hospice doctor, which means I take care of patients on their deathbeds. And we often talk about their lives. And undoubtedly, this happens a lot. People say, I really regret that I never had the energy, courage, or time to, right? They don't use those exact words, but pretty much they say, I really regret that I didn't do this thing that was deeply important for me. So I often tell young people, if you're looking for purpose anchors, put yourselves in the shoes of a person who's dying and ask yourself that question. If I found out I was dying next week, what would I regret that I never had the energy, courage, or time to do? And since you're not dying and you do have some agency, let's turn that into a purpose anchor. So I'm a great example of that. About 10 years ago, I did this mental exercise with myself, and I said, you know what? I really regret not traditionally publishing a book. If I found out I was going to die a week from when I did this exercise, I would have been like, I would have felt fairly bereft because this was really important to me. Yet I had been putting that off for years and years and years because it took some real courage and I was afraid. And so that's what I call a regret audit. It's like, take a regret, one you might have had on your deathbed if that unfortunate thing happens to you, and turn that into a purpose anchor, and let's start building a life of purpose around it. So I had to do the hard work then 10 years ago, and I said, okay, I really would regret not traditionally publishing a book. Well, how do I do that? So I started talking to people who'd publish books. I started looking for an agent. I just started writing out an outline of what I thought my book could be. All of that was the hard, purposeful work. It was my little p purpose. But now that I had an anchor, I could build a life of purpose around it. So we talked about the spaghetti method. We talked about a regret audit. There's some other really easy ways to start thinking about purpose anchors. I always talk about the joys of childhood. Like, kids tend to have an unbridled version of purpose that they get rid of as they get older and start thinking about getting a job and going to school and becoming what society wants them to be. So I always tell people, well, what were the posters in your room when you were a little kid? What were the drawings? Like, what did you win medals for? Those could be purpose anchors. When I was a little kid, I loved baseball cards. I had baseball cards everywhere and posters of baseball players. So for me, baseball cards were a little p purpose. I'm really busy now, but if I was looking for a version of purpose, that would be a great place to start. And another and last easy way to start thinking about purpose is look at your job. A lot of people don't love their jobs. So I tell you, write out the 10 or 12 roles and responsibilities of your job, and then start scratching out everything you don't like and see if anything's left. Like, is there anything in your job, even if it's something you do only for a small period of time, that you love? I was a practicing physician. I was burning out. I didn't love being a doctor. But when I started doing what I call the art of subtraction, getting rid of all the roles and responsibilities I didn't like, I was left with one thing I did love, which was hospice work. I really liked taking care of the terminally ill. In fact, I'd do it even if people weren't paying me for it. So using the art of subtraction, I realized that there was this one thing of work that I could then use as a purpose anchor to build a life of purpose around. So those are 3 or 4 great ways to start thinking about what are the purpose anchors in your life. And they're fairly straightforward.
Now, you talk about regret being the price of playing it safe. Now, on the face of it, that seems to kind of conflict with the idea that I shouldn't have a big purpose, right? Because that's what playing it safe generates in my head when I'm thinking about it, is I shouldn't go after the big goal. But as I'm talking to you, it's kind of becoming a little bit clear to me that that's not what you mean. So what do you mean when you say regret is the price of playing it safe?
When I do these regret audits, it's called a life review with dying patients. They often say, I really regret I never had the energy, courage, or time to. And it's never to become president. It's never to have $1 billion. Most of the time, it's something much more straightforward. Like, I wish I spent more time in that basketball league that I loved. I wish I wrote that book. I wish I did this or that. Most of the time, it's not necessarily goal focused. It's that they didn't pursue that thing that was deeply important to them. They didn't become the person who did the thing, whether they succeeded or failed. It's not whether you succeed or fail. Why I say that regret is the price of playing it safe is a lot of people don't even jump into the ring. They don't even get into the arena. Right? So we want to create a life for people where they decide what's purposeful for them, and then they jump in the arena, and whether succeed or fail, they fight the valiant fight. And that's what we're really asking people to do. I'm not saying go out and become president. I'm saying you're interested in public service and you want to be a politician, get involved in some local race, go support a politician, do something. Doesn't matter if you succeed, it doesn't matter if you fail, but get in the arena and fight the fight. And that's what I think people get. So, and here's one of the reasons why, in fact, I think having these big goals keeps you from that, because a lot of people start thinking about having the courage and they start looking at this big goal and they're like, well, I'll never achieve that. So they don't even try. So the big goal is actually kind of toxic. It's more like, what kind of person do I want to be? Like, I want to write a book. I want to traditionally publish a book, but that's really it's not even the best goal. It's, I want to be a writer, right? A writer is a person who writes. So I have to have the courage to day in and day out to write. It doesn't matter if I write that book or not. It doesn't matter if I get it published or not. Those are all goals that I only have a certain amount of agency over. But whether I have the courage to sit down and start writing, whether I have the courage to become the person I want to be, that's where people fall short. So a lot of times it's not that they didn't reach their amazing goal, it's that they didn't even try. And this is something I've also noticed in the dying. A lot of people, they don't regret what they didn't succeed at. They regret what they didn't have the courage to try. And that's why goals can kind of throw you off. It's like, don't worry about the goal. Go out and try and do something. And whether you try or not is what you're going to regret.
Now, you write about, and you've alluded to it a little bit here, about using the lens of the dying as an instruction manual for our daily lives. How do we do that? Like, I mean, I get what you're saying when you say people on their deathbed regret things. You don't want to end up in that position, but how do we actually incorporate that so that we can implement it as a motivator in our lives?
Well, I mean, there's the Buddhist term memento mori, this idea of carrying the idea that you're constantly dying or could die with you. And I think that's really important. Like, a lot of times we pass things up because we don't have enough energy, or we don't have enough time, or we're too afraid to try, or we're afraid of failing. And this is a constant reminder that you don't know if you're going to get another chance, right? So take that trip, hang out with that person, write an essay for that contest. Like, just do it, because you don't know if you're going to get another chance. And the days become years and the years become decades. And at some point, and because of what I do for a living, I see this all the time, life just gets away from you. And you do end up one day on your deathbed and you're like, I thought I was going to do this thing. I thought I was finally going to have the courage, but I kept on putting it off more and more and more. And so we need some impetus to stop putting things off, right? Because it's hard work. Like, it takes courage to do things that are deeply important to you. And so we need something to push us towards doing that courageous act. And so remembering that we are all mortal and that we could die anytime is that little push that says, okay, you might step into something that at least originally feels a little scary. And I want to give you this extra push to go do it, as opposed to putting it off. Because, like I said, you could put it off forever. And then one day you'll have regret. When a doctor like me walks into your room and starts talking to you about end of life, and you're like, I always wanted to do that thing, but I never had the oomph to do it.
I'm curious to get your take on something, because on the face of it, it seems contradictory, but I don't think it is to what you're actually saying. I'm a big fan of the TV show House. I've seen every episode multiple times. And there's an episode where this lady's dying. And I think she was a cancer specialist, but she had given that up. She said, I don't want to be doing this anymore. She was brilliant, and she could have, maybe come up with a cure, but she said, I don't want to do that. I want to live my life for me. And that's what she was doing. And one of the other doctors was trying to pressure her. She was sick and she was in the hospital. And the doctor said, you should really be working in your field. And the doctor said to her, you're going to regret this on your deathbed, that you didn't spend more time devoted to cancer. And she said, well, you know what? I'm going to spend a few minutes on my deathbed. I'm going to spend decades living my life, and I'm going to live my life like I want to. It seems like that woman took the principle that you're talking about, but kind of reversed it directionally wise, is that she established while she was living that I'm going to do what I want to do now. rather than the sort of approach that you're taking where you're regretting on your deathbed the things that you didn't do. Is that another way to look at it? I mean, it was just a TV show after
Yeah,
all.
I think it's the same side of the coin. I mean, basically what you're saying is she's saying I'm only going to be, dying for minutes or days or weeks, but I'm going to live for all these years. I'm kind of reverse engineering it, saying, well, I want to give you the courage to do what she's already doing.
Yeah.
So let's look at what you might feel like on your deathbed about those years and how you live them, right? But there is something also really, really interesting in there, which I don't think was your question, but I think is important to point out. A lot of people talk about the privilege of pursuing purpose. And for instance, for this cancer patient, they may, well, it's kind of a privilege to do what you want, but as a cancer doctor, you're affecting and helping and saving all these lives. Like, you should do that, even if it doesn't light you up anymore. And my argument would be the exact opposite. Like, I was a physician and I was seeing, I was a general internal medicine doctor. So let's say I was seeing 1,000, 2,000 patients a year. And let's just assume that I was helping all those 2,000 patients, which I probably wasn't, but let's assume I was. But it wasn't lighting me up. I was burning out and it didn't feel very purposeful. I could keep doing that and affect 1,000, 2,000 people every year. And a lot of people would look at me and say, boy, that's a real meaningful life. Even if you don't love it, you should do that. But I would turn that around and say, well, when I decided to leave medicine because it wasn't filling me up, I started blogging and podcasting and eventually writing books. And now, for instance, my podcast has had millions and millions of downloads, and my books have sold to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I've affected way more people by doing something that I was passionate about. And let me tell you, I didn't set out to write about finances or to write these books about purpose. I didn't set out to change the world. I did it because it lit me up. That was my little P purpose. A happy side effect was actually that I affected way more people. And so I'd say the same thing with cancer specialists. Yeah, you can affect people by doing something that doesn't light you up, and you probably have some impact. But if you start doing something that lights you up, you're probably more likely to impact even more people as a happy side effect, because you're going to be doing something that you show up intentionally to. And because it lights you up, other people, like a moth to a flame, are going to be attracted to that. And before you know it, you're going to have bigger impact anyway.
I like the way you put that, as it being a happy side effect. I mean, the name of my show, you can see, is The Rational Egoist. I'm an egoist. I believe that people should act in their own best interest and live for themselves. Now, I also believe, following the economist Adam Smith, that when people do that, it tends to have a better effect for everybody. But that's not my motivating purpose. And I'm interested to get your take on it. And I won't argue with you, I promise, even if you disagree with me. But is it wise to build your purposes around what other people think is best for you, or what other people want for you, as opposed to what you want for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't work. And in fact, we have both an anxiety crisis and a purpose crisis in our country today. And why? Because young people who don't have another sense of purpose, right? They're not involved with religion the way they used to be. They're not connected to their jobs the way they used to be. They're not part of social groups or communities the way they used to be. Where are young people trying to find their purpose? On TikTok and Instagram, from influencers who are trying to sell them something and are presenting to them a life of big P purpose, right? Like expensive clothes, travel around the world, 7-figure businesses. Or they're getting it from advertising, right? Where you're watching the TV commercials that are showing you all the things your life should look like or aspire to because they want to sell you something. Even your parents are pushing some big P purpose on you because they're looking at their life and all the things they didn't accomplish, and they want to help you accomplish the things that they never were able to. So they're pushing all sorts of versions of purpose on you. All of these versions of purpose are someone else's version of purpose. And so we're diving into this big P purpose that other people are foisting on us head first, and we're finding it's not filling us up. A lot of times we're finding that we're not the right person at the right time. We don't have enough agency. Like, no matter how bad someone on TikTok wants to tell me that I can have 6-pack abs or run a 7-figure business, I just might not have the ability genetically or time, or I might not have the greatest mentors, or whatever reason I might not be able to do those things. And so when you try to take on someone else's version of purpose, especially someone who's trying to foist it on you for their own needs, not your needs, you're running right into a wall. And that's exactly what we have with young people right now is why do we have so much depression? Why do we have so much anxiety? They're learning a version of purpose through TikTok and Instagram and advertising through society that is big P purpose. It's toxic. It's very goal oriented. A lot of times, most people can't reach those goals. They're very aspirational. And so they're feeling lost and desperate. And they're coming to me and they're saying, I can't find my purpose.
I have a lot of, not, I don't know about a lot, but some people that like to give me advice. This is how you should do your show. You should do your show this way. You should do your show that way. And I'm reminded of years ago, I used to do a lot of writing, and I wrote a paper. And one person said to me, Mike, I like your writing, but it's just too far out there. It's too intellectual. You got to dumb it down a little bit. Another guy read it and said, you know what? It's good. The only problem is you dumb it down too much. And I learned from that I cannot please everybody. It's not possible. So when someone gives me advice on how to do the show, it's not just one person, and that person sometimes will get a little maybe offended. I don't know if that's the right word, but taken aback by the fact that I don't take the advice. And I try to explain, listen, if I try to take everybody's advice that gives me a criticism, I'll end up not being me anymore. It just will end up me trying to please everybody, which ultimately I can't do. And the show will suck because it's not going to be me. And I'm imagining that that's got to be the case with a lot of these purposes. Whenever somebody tries to live their life, and they have an abundance of people giving them suggestions, it makes it difficult to be you and to live. But on the other hand, I've benefited in my life from good advice. So how do you strike that balance where you don't want to just be immune from every piece of possible good advice, but you also aren't chasing your tail trying to please everybody?
Well, I think it's simple, right? You're doing something that feels like little P purpose to you, right? You're creating this show and that's exciting to you. So what happens when you get this input? One of two things happens. Someone gives you input and you're like, wow, that's really cool. And you get excited and you're like, how can I integrate this? And this is awesome. This is going to make the show better. And I'm feeling great about this. Or you get the input and you're like, oh, this is so painful. And now I'm going to have to spend an hour doing this new thing that I hate doing, but I have to do it because this is how I'm going to make my show really great. And if I make my show really great, more people are going to listen. If more people listen, then I'm going to get more advertising revenues. I mean, you can tell the difference there. The question is, when you start getting this advice, does it add to your excitement? Does it light you up more? Are you like, wow, I did this thing that I loved, and it put me in community with a bunch of people who also do what I love. And now, because they know more than me, they're mentoring me. And this is really exciting. And I'm growing and this feels good. That's a whole different thing than I'm doing this thing I love and I'm minding my business. And this is awesome. And I'm getting these people who keep on wanting me to do these things that don't feel good, that don't connect to me, that even if they do reach some goal, they still aren't really like making me feel like I'm enjoying this process anymore. I think you automatically know in your heart, right? So yes, a lot of us, criticism always is a little hard, right? It takes courage to change. So whenever anyone gives you criticism, you're going to have that moment of, everyone gets it. But then what comes next? Do you start looking at it and you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of a point and this could be really cool and get excited about it? Or the more you go down that rabbit hole, the more negative this feels, the more you're spending time doing things you don't like, the more it's changing your program into something you don't want it to be. I don't think it's as complicated as people think. I think it's fairly intuitive.
It's interesting that you mentioned something in there about people who are already in the field. You said something along those lines that offer criticism. And I think it's important to know who's criticizing you. My mentor, for instance, Todd Feinberg's a very successful talk show host. And he will often interrupt people when he's interviewing them. And people get upset. Oh, you're always interviewing the guest. And sometimes I've been criticized for interrupting. And what I've learned, and what he told me, what people aren't understanding when they offer that criticism is they're seeing what happens when I interrupt or when Todd interrupts. What they don't see is how the show goes if you just allow somebody to talk nonstop and never interrupt. It becomes a person giving a monologue, and it's not very interesting because the person will ultimately stray from the topic, and it just is not good. I've learned that. So now I understand what Todd meant. Whereas and that's why I think it's important when both giving and taking advice, it's come from somebody that knows what they're talking about. It's very, very important.
That's funny. I help mentor people who put together podcasts. And actually, we make that point often is that a well-placed interruption actually, A, sounds more like real conversation, but B, is a really good chance to highlight a specific point or talk about a specific contradiction. So we always suggest that the first rule is don't interrupt people to be a good host, but then you have to learn how to break the rules appropriately to create even something better. And that's exactly what that is. So it's funny you mentioned that, because I always talk about this idea that when you do it correctly, interrupting someone actually can be very impactful for a show.
Especially like what you just said, and hadn't even thought of it before, but it's absolutely true. If I want to highlight a point and you are in the middle of talking and you hit something that strikes something I think is going to be a great conversation piece, if I don't get in right there and instead I say, well, let me just wait, and then you talk for 10 minutes, you mentioned 15 other things, I might forget what the original point was. Or when I go back to it, by the time I go back to it, the audience is like, why the hell is he talking about this? We've just talked about all these things. So I have a couple more questions for you. One is the climb. What do you mean by the climb?
So the climb is purpose in action. So if we think about it, we talked about, well, how do you find your purpose? You build it, but you need those purpose anchors. So once you know what those purpose anchors are, you then have to build a series of activities around them that light you up. And so for me, let's say, book writing, I used the regret audit to find an anchor, which is traditionally publish a book. That was the easy part, figuring out the anchor. But now I had to actually take action. And that's what the climb is. Now, for every purpose anchor, you could have tons and tons of different climbs, right? So for me, it was traditionally publishing a book or book writing. One climb could be actually getting an agent and writing that book, but another climb could be starting a blog about book writing. I could switch my podcast to be about book writers. Like, these are all different climbs that I could take. I could go join a class to help me become a better writer. I could join a writer's group. All of those are separate climbs. They're just activities around your purpose anchor to start doing more of things that light you up. And what I always try to teach people is that little p purpose is abundant. In other words, for every purpose anchor you can think of, we can then line up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different climbs, joyful activities around that purpose anchor that will be a good use of your time. You'll be doing things that light you up, that excite you. And so that's what the climb is. It's just purpose and anchor. It's how we actionalize our purpose anchors and actually start building activities around them.
Okay. The last thing I want to get into is excuses. People will say, I don't have the energy, I don't have the time, I don't have the money to have the purpose. How do you answer them?
Yeah, I unfortunately, and this is really rude, I say that's BS. Okay, so why is it BS?
That's what I say too.
Let's talk about the biggest excuses. So time is a huge excuse, right? But the Bureau of Labor Statistics does continuously, the American Time Survey, it updates every year. The American Time Survey shows that your average American has 5 hours for leisure time every day. 5 hours. And you could argue, yeah, that's great for rich people, but poor people don't. Well, actually, the data shows that lower socioeconomic classes also have maybe even slightly more. And so this idea that you don't have time, if you are an average American, that's just not true. People spend a lot of time on social media. They spend a lot of time watching TV. They spend a lot of time doing leisurely activities. Now, granted, those could be versions of little p purpose. So if you love mystery science thrillers and you spend every night for an hour and a half watching a new movie and that lights you up, and you join a group of movie buffs and you guys talk about it online all the time, hey, that's little p purpose. That's great. But if you're doing something that doesn't light you up and isn't interesting to you, then you probably could be pursuing little p purpose instead. So that's the time issue. Let's talk about the money issue. This is a really big one. Here's how I address this. There are tons and tons of studies about money and happiness. And I don't want to go through all of them, but there's some original ones that show the more money you make, the happier you are to an extent. But then it ends after about $70,000 you make a year. This was back in 2012, Kahneman and Deaton. It's a well-known study. Not a particularly high quality study, but when you really look at happiness, the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study started in the 1900s and looked at happiness by doing a bunch of questionnaires in a bunch of Harvard students. And over the years, it was not just the Harvard students. They brought in their family members, and then they brought in a bunch of controls from the Boston area because they wanted, not as highly educated people, et cetera. But eventually ended up being thousands and thousands of people. And they studied these people every 2 years, first by questionnaires, but eventually over the years, they started doing blood tests. Eventually, they got real sophisticated, did like EEGs and MRIs. After 80 years of studying these people, they asked one simple question: what makes people happy? And funny enough, they found it wasn't money. It wasn't career, it wasn't achievements, it wasn't even purpose, and we'll talk about this in a moment. What they actually found, it was interpersonal connections. Interpersonal connections make people happy, not money, not career, nothing like that. So I just said it wasn't purpose. Now I'm making this argument we should be following purpose. And in fact, I make the point often in my book that there's studies out there that show that having a sense of purpose is associated with health, happiness, and longevity. But that's not what the Harvard Adult Health Study showed. My argument is that when you pursue little p purpose, it lights you up, it connects you to other people, and you end up forming communities. And it's the communities, the interpersonal connection, which brings you happiness. Notice none of this has anything to do with money. You don't need money to pursue purpose. Like I said, let's say you love science thrillers and you end up watching them at night in some of your copious 5 hours of free time, and you join an online group of other people who love them, and that's what you do. You're part of this community. You meet every Sunday and watch a movie together. After watching the movie, you get excited and you go to happy hour, and your friend Joe, who you met through this, sometimes is down on his luck and he just divorced his wife, and you sit there and you comfort him, and then sometimes something bad happens to you and your dog dies, and then he comforts you. And boom, without spending a dollar, you've created a sense of purpose, built community, and probably are happier. Money is a great tool to building purpose. There's no question about it. If you have a lot of money, I can stop working if I have tons of money, and there I have all this time to pursue purpose. Or I don't want to clean my house. If I have a lot of money, someone else can clean my house so I can pursue purpose in some other way. Or I want to write a book so I can hire a book coach because I have money and they can teach me how to write a book. That's all true. Money is a great tool, but it's only one tool. We have other tools in our tool belt. Our youth, our energy, our passions, our communities, our abilities, these are also tools. And a lot of times people forget that even in the absence of money, you can use these tools to pursue purpose. So let's say you're 22 years old and you hate your job and it's 8 to 6 Monday through Friday and you absolutely hate it. And you're like, I don't have enough money to pursue purpose. I have to go to this job. It's painful, but what choice do I have? And I would say, well, it's true. You don't have a lot of tool of money. I'm 52. I have a lot more money. So I don't have to go to work 8 to 6 like you do. But you've got your youth and your energy. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have kids. So on Sunday afternoon, while I'm busy running to my kids' football games or busy mowing the lawn, you could go out and just do something purposeful for a few hours. You could go on a bike ride. You could read a novel. You could get involved in some volunteer community that lights you up. And so it's true, you might not have money, but you have energy and maybe more free time, tools that I don't have. And so if you think money is the only way to do or pursue anything, I think you're going to be a little bit lost. I think you have tons of other tools and you just have to utilize those until the point where you also build a financial framework and have some money. And then you can use that wonderful tool of money too. But there's studies about happiness and people who live purposeful lives. And some of the poorest countries have some of the highest happiness indexes. So I think money is a poor excuse. So money and time are poor excuses. I really think it's mostly about courage. I really do.
Awesome. Jordan, first of all, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today. Second, where can people find you?
The easiest way is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can see links to both of my books, as well as my podcast, the Art of Invest podcast, as well as my Substack and blogs. You can find everything there, jordangrumet.com.
Thank you so much once again. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.